Welcome to the Courage Over Cowardice podcast, where I cover topics and issues that will help you take a stand for Christ in culture. More than ever, followers of Jesus need courage to stand up, speak up, and to live out their faith, because people need to know that there's a God in heaven that loves them, and it is His truth that sets people free. Thanks for listening today, and I hope that you enjoyed the episode. Hey, I want to welcome you to the Courage Over Cowardice podcast as we kick off this new year. Today, we're jumping in right into the fire with Pastor David Engelhardt, who is no stranger to the podcast. Pastor David is the founder of King's Church in New York City. He's also an attorney and a board member at Turning Point USA. A lot of great stuff. No stranger to the podcast or to Freedom Life. David, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Sam. Good to be here. Excited to jump into the stuff we got. I think it's important stuff, important for believers to know about and know how to think through.
So we are gearing up for a very interesting year. I'm not a Debbie Downer. I'm a realist, and I believe that God is moving. Incredible things are happening. But I also see what has happened in recent years, and as we head into this election year, it's fraught with the potential for very disconcerting or destabilizing events that we're seeing within our culture. So I wanted to talk about a couple of them, but even before I jump into the Great Reset and what's happening with BLM, the Arab version of the Palestine movement, Free Palestine, and so on, what do you see heading in here to 2024?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of big things for me is that, the people, and when I say the people, I mean the middle American people, the majority of those people want to see Trump reelected. The polls show it, the numbers show it. This is not a guess. This is the reality in the majority of the United States outside of the major metropolitan regions. That doesn't obviously mean there's not Democrats in those areas, but the majority of Americans want to see this guy come back. And we could have events that take place this year, but the GOP is against Trump coming back. I've heard and had conversations with people in Congress and outside of Congress in the last couple of weeks talking about the GOP kind of swamp core is doing everything in their ballot to try to get him off the ballot, everything in their power to get him off the ballot. And they want Nikki Haley in because she's a globalist, because everybody's going to make money when she's there. She'll be fine with printing money. And I don't know Nikki Haley. I've never met her. I don't know really much about her. But because Trump has so much steam, we could have another event. What I see again, Sam, is they love every 4 years to poke the racism bear. And so they're going to say, they're going to find an event. It's going to be in the mono news culture. It's going to be everywhere. It's going to talk about how racist the cops are, how racist whoever is. And there'll be race riots again, because that kind of confusion, black people are right now polling in I don't know if it's like 10 to 15 points higher than they ever poll for a Republican nominee. It's insane. Wow. I was with President Trump last week, and he was talking about how incredible the polling numbers are in the black communities for him. And so if the left can play their standard hand and pretend people are stupid and, say, oh, here's a cop who's arresting somebody who had a gun and cocaine all over his face and trying to stab the cop, and the cop shoots that guy, and then all of a sudden race riots erupt because the news media shows it in a light that's most negative towards the police. And obviously we can do that with cameras and media and editing. That's what's so Orwellian about our time, is we literally can rewrite by perspective in real time the events that are happening. And that's why believers have to be really smart. And that's why they have to have, if they're going to foray into the news world, and my recommendation, I think we literally talked about this last time on your show. My recommendation is do one of two things. Don't foray into the news world, or only listen to people like Pastor Sam or Charlie Kirk or people that are trustworthy. If you foray into that world without having a broad perspective and being able to analyze a bunch of different perspectives, it is a charade. It is a political play, and you will get deceived. And that's what's going to happen this summer. The political play will engage, and whether that's I really hope it's not another medical thing like the COVID outbreak that was in part certainly calculated. I don't think it was calculated to that level, but I think it was in part calculated. We've known as a nation that if the Supreme Court has stated this in their briefs, when you do mail-in ballots, corruption levels increase at a multiplied level. So this is not news to anybody. Everybody knew this. And so will that happen again? I don't know. I mean, it definitely could happen again. The church needs to vote. If the church votes, we win. We get somebody that's pro-life. We get somebody that's pro our nation. We get somebody that's pro borders. We get somebody that's pro benefiting your family before benefiting, Klaus Schwab.
Yeah. Well, that's a great lead in. I agree with you completely. When you think about what's happening, I want to go to the Great Reset, globalism, and all those things in a moment. And I just want to say to those listening to the podcast, I heard Catherine Herridge, who's pretty well known in the news media, drop a predictive line saying that she anticipates a Black Swan event, which is essentially a destabilizing event that changes everything. COVID, 9/11. So whenever that's coming out in the media, to me, it sounds like there's something being programmed within that. But I think there's such an incredible opportunity for the church if we will lean into the Word of God, if we'll be courageous in the midst of all of that, in the midst of the crazy, to bring truth and light, for sure.
Yeah, just on that point, Sam, just something for your listeners for their analysis. Like the way you correctly analyze the future, the way you correctly prognosticate about the future or speculate about the future is by looking at patterns of the past. History doesn't exactly repeat itself. There's a famous quote that says, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And so we see the same kinds of patterns in nations and peoples and cities. We can see that on macro levels when we look to the fall of Rome, but we can see that on micro levels when we look at patterns of voting inside certain cycles. I certainly saw it as a resident of New York City. It was so palpable to me in 2016 and in 2014, the ginning up of racism. I remember riding on the subway. You can feel the tension on the subway between, black and white and all of this stuff because of how the media has ginned people up. So the Black Swan event, just the guess is not, it's an approximate guess, but it's not approximately based upon what we've just seen, what we just saw in 2020 and what we saw in 2016 with those riots as well. Yeah,
correct. So those that are listening right now, they may or may not be familiar with something called the Great Reset. And the Great Reset, I found some of the details, and then I'll let you commentate on it, is there's an agenda that by 2030, the world will be reset, not based on nationalism, but on globalism. And we should have a biblical perspective to that. And some of the things that are said in this is you'll own nothing and be happy. And these are some of the statements that have been scrubbed from their website, many of them, but they're still out there on the internet, and you can find them. The U.S. will not be the world's only superpower. You won't die waiting for an organ donor. I'm not going to jump into these. I'm just going to state them, and then we can go back to any of them. You'll eat less meat, which in response to that, I've been eating as much meat as I possibly can. I intend on going the other direction. I'm going to have the biggest carbon footprint that I possibly can as a human. 1 billion people will be displaced by climate change. You could be preparing to go to Mars, and Western values, which I would say Judeo-Christian ethic values, but some would say, look at that maybe a little different, will have been tested to their breaking point. So those were the predictions from the World Economic Forum, which in partnership with the United Nations are setting the de facto policy that's impacting the entire world and every person on the planet.
Yeah. So to springboard off of that, Sam, the Great Reset is being forwarded by the World Economic Forum, and that is a group of billionaires primarily that are leading this and they want to control the world. I mean, it sounds like science fiction. If you listen to Dr. James Lindsay talk about it, he always says this. It sounds like literally like a science fiction film, but it's not. And Charles, what is his name? I just fell out of my mouth. Klaus Schwab.
Yeah,
not Charles Schwab. Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab is the head chair of it, of the World Economic Forum, and they are promoting the central idea here for people to understand is globalism and global domination of the entire world. That there would be a group of people that rule the entire world, and why? Because of power and money and technology and wealth. And our technology is getting to the place, I don't believe it's there yet. I don't think it'll be there by 2030. It's getting to the place where that idea is feasible, that it's possible, that through technology, you can bring a lot of benefit to people, and you can surveil people, and you can watch and make sure they're behaving accordingly. If you look at a biblical perspective, it looks a lot like the Tower of Babel. It looks like the centralization of power to rule the world and build the biggest thing, create, basically touch the heavens, rule the entire earth with our wealth, technology, and power. Technology, obviously, as the tool. And we know what God does. He scatters that. And so the World Economic Forum, in order for them to do what they want to do, they really need to disrupt our economic system, our currency. There needs to be a lot of disruption. There has to be disruption. There has to be chaos. There has to be fear in order for you to hand over your self-autonomy. So this has happened in New York City, right? This happened with COVID. We all know this now. We get the story. But in New York City, I did a bet with a guy just right out here on the street, a couple of blocks away. And he said, COVID's coming. And I said, nah, New Yorkers are rebels. They're autonomous. They're independent. This will be 2 weeks, and New Yorkers will want to be back, back in the mix. We're all tough here. And then he said, you're completely wrong. I said, well, no, I'm not. And then I bet him $1,000. Oh, no. He said, do you want to bet $1,000? I think we did bet $1,000. And I talked him down after I lost, like 5 to 6 months later, into taking him out to dinner, which I still haven't done. I'm sorry, Mike, I'll take you out to dinner at some point. But in times of chaos, people hand over their autonomy. They hand over, we see that, remember, in Egypt, where there was starvation and the people said, here's all my property, here's all my wealth, here's everything I have. And I hand it over to you, Pharaoh. You can control and rule everything because I'm scared. So the only way a Great Reset can happen is by a massive, nuclear bomb level situation destroying our currency. And so that's why I don't love, I don't know how much I believe in I don't know if God's going to allow them to do this, but I know the left, secular humanism, it always, just like the Tower of Babel, it always tends towards gathering power, because power corrupts and power is magnetic. It keeps gathering unto itself until that corruptive nature of power destroys the wielder. So in my perspective, I think the World Economic Forum guys will die, and I don't mean die physically. I mean, their systems will collapse before they affect the world, but they want to affect the world. And if Christians aren't vigilant and we're not aware of these things, it could happen if we don't stand on the watchtowers, stand guard. Those things are real, and our guardians need to be aware of these things. So
talk to us for just a few moments about, this is a biblical issue. It's not just a governmental issue in the sense that we're detached from this, we're not of this world, because the Bible is not about globalism. It actually teaches nationalism. So maybe hit on that again, if you would.
Yeah, let me just focus far back away from this. Corrupt systems always concentrate power. It's one of the most horrible things about our current American governance structure is that in the 90s, the DC wasn't as big as it is now. It's like double the size, maybe even 2.5 times the size, because our government is getting so large. And our founding fathers, if you read the Federalist Papers, they're fighting to the death over keeping the government as small as possible, because governments produce nothing. So they can only grow by taking stuff from you. It's literally the only way they can grow. They don't go and grow a crop. They don't go and make a car. They only can exist by taking your stuff. That's how they get bigger. And the less stuff you have, the less incentivized you'll be to work for yourself and for your family. And so it begins this vast corruption of the entire nation when governments get overly big. So when we look at the biblical model, Jesus came to earth and he said, hey, disciples, this is how to live. And then I don't know if you guys read this version of the Bible. He sets up this kingdom on earth in Jerusalem where he just is in charge and tells everyone what to do. No, that's not what he does. He gives his Holy Spirit to people and he disperses power to his disciples. Then it's dispersed through the church to the saints, which is the promise in Jeremiah 31:34. The promise in Jeremiah 31:34 says, and it shall be so in the new covenant, no man shall teach his neighbor, saying, know ye the Lord, for they shall all know the Lord. This is the promise and desire of God for all his sons and daughters to grow as sons and daughters and actually know him. The opposite system, and I hate to bash the Catholic Church, but I'm going to, is like all of the power goes to the top. You can't read the word. I mean, they spoke in Latin for hundreds of years, right? Their services were Latin. What is that? That's the concentration of power. And even today, if you talk to a normal Catholic churchgoer, like they don't really believe they can have a relationship with God unless it's mediated through this organization. That is not the promise. The promise I see, and this is a model. This is the macro picture, is that Jesus wants you to have a relationship with you, to know him. And that all of that philosophy, all that ideology is from God, and it underpins our nation. It underpins small governance. It underpins churches. It underpins you like loving being on your town city council. Like that's where you should find your life and your purpose. Like everybody's got to be the president. The president should be, it should be much smaller, but we've, de Tocqueville said this. Alexander de Tocqueville he was a French philosopher that came to the United States in the 1800s, and he was early 1800s like, this is what's going on here. This is pretty incredible. I've never seen anything like it. And he said, once the politicians learn that they can buy people's votes by giving them other people's money, so I take your money and then I give it to John and Sue and Sally, and she keeps voting for me because I keep taking your money. He said, once the politicians learn to do that, it will be the end of the democracy. What is just such an incredible idea. And that leads into the Palestine thing. But that's part of this issue of centralization of power is not a biblical concept. I mean, God is trying to raise sons in his image. That's what he wants. He gives power. He gives his image. He gives life. He gives strength. And the correct political model tries to model the same. I feel like I'm rambling, but I got to say this one more thing. General John Ashcroft was a friend of mine for a while. He's an incredible guy, incredible believer. And I said to him one day, I said, General Ashcroft, why? General Ashcroft was the attorney general in the Bush administration and Missouri senator and governor of Missouri as well. And I said, what is the purpose of government? And he was so brilliant. He had incredible answers to all of these most basic questions. He said, David, the purpose of government is to maximize freedom. And I said, I instantly understood it, because if you have a bully running around punching people in the face, the people won't be free, right? Yeah. Like, so it brings in all of these concepts of like, how do we create an environment? I think that's what the phrase he said, an environment that maximizes liberty. How do we create that environment and then trust the people, as opposed to the Klaus Schwabs who are like, I'll tell you what to do. You got to eat bugs now. You got to eat cockroaches now. And look, John the Baptist ate crickets. So it's like, maybe we should have more crickets. That debate can be had between free people, not Klaus Schwab telling me that I have to eat those crickets, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really interesting when you look where we are globally and, within the context of, people have different views on eschatology. I know we have similar but different views on that. We believe that Jesus is returning, but all these things that are at play are very fascinating, but all pointed to this control. The God of this age that desires a totalitarian control. And as you're talking about, like, globalism is not a biblical idea in that sense that the nations God designed. You go back to the Tower of Babel, and there's many other things that are at play that we can see as we head into this year. And one of those things, I've done a few podcasts on this, so kind of a broad overview. But we see the issue with Israel and Hamas and the as I say, the BLM Arab version, which is a lot of the same people and white liberals.
Great
so
way
I'd like you to talk about it. Yeah, from your perspective, James Lindsay, who I listen to from time to time as well, and he said something along the lines of, it's not about the issue, it's about the revolution.
That's right.
And so, like, whatever the issue of the day is a placeholder to accomplish something that's much broader. So kind of give me your thoughts on that, because you just got done watching some of this go down in New York City.
Yeah, we are launching this conservative news channel. I consider it a competitor to Vice News, and Vice is just very edgy kind of metropolitan journalism, and we're launching this conservative version, which is Christian. It's civilization, orthodoxy, art that we're trying to talk about. But we've been doing these Palestine videos, and I put one up last night. Literally outside my office, people were coming up the 2-3 train and going to be at the Bull, I guess, to shout their Palestine stuff. They were saying NYPD, KKK, IDF, they're all the same. And it's just, first of all, it's like just so insane and illogical. The NYPD is a majority non-white people, right? They're not a white supremacist thing. The IDF is not out trying to kill black people. Like, they're all the same. It's this just, I mean, first of all, let's talk about, as Christians, it's a spirit. It's a spirit of chaos. It's a spirit of destruction. It's a spirit that wants to destroy what's good and beautiful and righteous. It's hard to build beautiful things. It's hard to build a society. It's very easy to tear things apart. When my son Leon was little, we would play Legos together, and I would build the Legos, and he would always want to smash them down. And I realized it's because he wanted to participate, and it was really hard for him to actually manipulate the blocks because he was, 1.5 or 2. I'm talking about little. But he could smash it and feel like he's a part. And there's something about young people that want to be a part, that have a desire for power, a desire for significant substance. And the only way to really be a part is to smash things, because they don't want to go through the process of long, hard, arduous creation of civilization, which is a hard thing to do. The liberal wants to always amalgamate or draw power unto itself. And so in order to do that, they love to break down systems. It's not just liberals in the sense of, right now for us, it's the liberal left, but the fascists did this same thing. It's totalitarians. Yeah. And the Palestinians are totalitarians. It's, I want control of how you think. I want control of how you live. That's exactly what the World Economic Forum is. For Christians, like, we don't hold a gun to people and say, believe in Christ. We create places of beauty. We create systems of freedom, and we say, we're going to persuade you to believe in Christ. And so the conservative wants freedom. It wants the opportunity to exchange, not with gross profanity and pornography and the other disgusting things that our Supreme Court ruled in the 60s were free speech. That's not free speech. That's a manipulation of free speech. But conservatives want to build and create and move slowly. So the Free Palestine thing, I think the big takeaway, I think, for people to think about it, like, why is the left? Why are the homosexuals and the transgender people? Why are they for Palestine when, if they were in Palestine, they would be thrown off the roof? I mean, literally, right? We know that. Why is that? Because the left always identifies with the oppressed, because it's axiomatic to their belief system that if they can get the oppressed on their team, they can vote for them, and that'll put them in power. Therefore, they hand out welfare that puts people in slavery and tyranny, soft tyranny, for the rest of their life. They pursue the immigrant culture and the illegal immigrant culture. They pursue every group across the social platform that seems like they're underrepresented or oppressed, because they do exactly what de Tocqueville said you ought not do, which is hand out government subsidies to try to win and buy those votes so they can enshrine their power. It's incredibly evil, and it happens all the time.
Yeah, you see so many of these marches, whether it's in cities. We seen that over the holidays, across highways, trying to stop the flow of traffic, leading into airports to be disruptive, to point to a cause. And the cause that they're pointing to is so interesting. And again, I talked about this in other podcasts. I'm not going to get into the details. People say, well, we're against Zionism, which essentially is, Israel's right to exist. It's a push against the Jewish people. It's anti-Semitism. But there's a term that is being said a lot. You find it in university. It's mainstream now. And a lot of people, I've watched a few videos over the holidays of people being questioned about this that were out protesting. And the answers are always, they're humorous, but it's sad. And it's related to decolonization. So maybe talk about that. Just explain, what is decolonization? Because it seems like everybody wants to decolonize the world, which is pretty silly from my perspective. But maybe just give you some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, colonization is a really approximate and foolhardy term. And the reason I say approximate and foolhardy is because it only stands on one underlying premise. A greater power or party came in here and told us what to do. And oftentimes that came with the appropriation of food supplies or lumber or metals or whatever. But generally the stronger powers are doing civilization better, and nobody seems to want to recognize that. So let's take India and Britain, for example. So Britain comes to colonize India in, I don't know, early 1800s. I don't even remember. I think it's sometime in the early 1800s. I may be wrong. Maybe it's late 1700s. And in India, if a husband dies, they get big stacks of wood. Do you know this story, Sam? They get a big pyre of wood. And then if the husband dies, they throw the wife on the pyre of wood, and they freaking light the pyre of wood on fire and burn the wife alive. And the British colonizers say, we're not doing that anymore. No burning wives alive allowed anymore. And so when we think of colonization, our colleges talk about the theft of land. Battles over land have been happening for the history of mankind. Battles over land is what the history of the world is made up of. And so is it right or is it justified? Sometimes it's justified. Sometimes it's right. But the idea that it's always a bad idea and it should never be done brings you to the great Thomas Sowell question, which is when and how. So Thomas Sowell, whenever people ask him a question they make some grand assumption about economics, he always says, okay, in what particular instance? Okay, so we're now talking about the Iroquois in upstate New York, and the Pilgrims came in, and you're like, well, the Iroquois were the early Spanish missionaries. The Iroquois were cutting out their hearts and eating them while they're alive, because they wanted the strength of these missionaries. And where the Iroquois lived, the Algonquin lived like 5 minutes earlier, and then the Oneida lived like 10 minutes before that, and then the Delaware tribe lived 20 minutes before that. And it's so inapproximate as to who has the rights to the land that it becomes a laughing matter, because it's like, well, are you talking about like 1407? Or are you talking about 1310? And that's the insanity of the Palestine argument. It's like, well, it was Palestine's. It's like, yeah, and it was, I think was it Syria's before that? Was it, I did this historical study. It's like 20 countries, and then it's back to Israel, because Rome basically you and I know this, destroyed Jerusalem in 80-70. Before 80-70, it belonged to Jerusalem for an eon. Before that, whose was it? Was it the Canaanite people then? They're not Palestinians, and you go back and forth, and it becomes a matter that you can't adjudicate, and it becomes irrational. So the rational human says, okay, what do we do right now? We have a people group and a people group. Can they get along together? Well, it seems like the one guys are shooting like 1,000 rockets every couple of months at the other guys. Well, they can't do that. So they're either going to get completely pushed out of, this is it. These are the only options. Either completely get pushed out of the land, or we, with the larger land mass and the more sophisticated defense and people group, and actually more sophisticated economy and country, will all leave. Those are the only two options. Say you have somebody that lives next to your house and you're like, you know, I don't really like this guy. And then he shoots a gun at your house. You're like, okay, this is bad. And then he's like shooting a gun at your house all the time. You're either going to have to destroy that person or move. Those are the only options, or get him moved, you know, by the police. So at first, you know, I'm not opposed to the conversation about a two-state option. I know a lot of Christians freak out when I say that. I'm not opposed to that conversation. But when people are shooting at you every day, over and over and over again, which appears to be happening, you have to deal with them, and they can't now live next door. They lose the right to live next door if they shoot at you every day.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And you see the fervor by which people are involved and wanting to stand up for the oppressed, which is really interesting when you take a look at, you know, the Jewish people. Someone made this point. Talk about a people group that's been probably the most oppressed throughout history. They've been alive as long as, you know, people in India and China, who have billions of people, and yet, you know, with the Jewish people, you have millions. I don't know what the number is, maybe 20. And it's really fascinating, but it is the spirit of the age that's within that. So these are all interconnected together spiritually, but they're all kind of converging right now in this moment. And I think what's tied into this is this illegal immigrant invasion that's happening to our country that is so bold and out there. And you have Christians, which I'll say a few things about that in a moment, that are, well, you know, you need to love the refugee.
Right.
There's such a poor thinking biblically and scripturally, and I have some thoughts on that, but what do you have to say about that? I look at this and say, you know, the great replacement is a strategy. It's obvious. There are millions of people pouring across. We have no idea who ultimately is here, and the potential for great harm and damage through terror and everything else is there, and it's obviously intentional.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this. I think one of my thoughts is one of my soapboxes. I don't think we've talked about before. Is like the great replacement will happen, and it will happen. It's happening in Europe by 2050. France and many of the European countries. This is not hyperbole. It's not like fear mongering, white nationalism, fear mongering. Just the stats. France will be majority Muslim. You know, and so it's just they have 6 to 12 kids, and the Western people have 0 to 2 kids. That will happen in America if the church doesn't champion family again. That will happen in the United States of America. The Muslims in where are they? They're in Michigan and Wisconsin and up there. They will outpopulate, and we will have a nation within a nation. And I don't know, you know, like to the listeners, like, you know what their nations look like? Primarily people in burqas living under the grip of terror and economically impoverished primarily. And so expect that if we don't turn back to God and follow his ways. So I actually think the immigration thing comes from the larger progressive leftist, we can call it democratic mindset, which is pro-immigration again, because it's pro-oppressed people group. And I think they are just over their skis. I think they always try to get and hand out, you know, welfare checks to people that are coming in so they look like the heroes. Democrats have been doing it in New York City for hundreds of years. I mean, truly, since the early 1800s, they've been doing this stuff. And it's a pattern. It's one of their patterns of politics. And I think now they're kind of waking up. You know, me and my friend Sincere were down on the block just yesterday, and there was five immigrants all fist fighting over a car, because it's impossible to get a car. Somebody got a car. Now there's a fist fight, and there's like these, you know, this is civilization unraveling because there's an overflow of people, and there's a very simple calculation. You can't take too much people. If anybody's interested in watching episode 4 of the PBS New York series by Ken Burns. It talks about immigration and people coming through Ellis Island. No one sick, no one infirmed, no one that had, like, if they thought you had a mental disease, they literally turn you around and send you back home. They split you from your family and put you on the boat and send you back home, because there was this idea like, we can only grow a great nation with people that are honest. No criminals, by the way, are allowed to come over. If you have a criminal record, on the boat, sent back home. So honest, hardworking, virtuous, not sick, because you can't bring a sick person and say, now take care of me. But that's the model that we've been doing. Democrats have been foolishly doing it. We're learning it's biting us in New York City. I think we have $1 billion over budget because of this issue. I wrote a book called Good Kills. So there's a chapter called Heaven Has a Wall. And so yes. I think the biblical picture is there's walls and there are processes for reasons.
Yeah, I was reading a Twitter thread by Josh Howton. He had some good stuff recently, and I don't know if you know him, but he had made a comment about responding to the Jesus was a refugee, which is really popular during December, especially. You know, Jesus is a refugee. Why do you want all these little children out in the cold to even though it's grown men from various countries coming, but he was said basically that phrase is it's a descriptive phrase that's often deployed as a case closed prescriptive proof for Christians. And a couple things that he said it conflates descriptive and prescriptive. What the Bible describes is not the same as what the Bible prescribes. The fallacy of logic is easily seen when applying it to just about anything else. He said, if a wife skeptically asks, should you really be indiscriminately accepting any and all invitations from your fishing buddies? And you respond, well, Jesus went fishing. Well, good luck with that logic. Which is, I think, a great example. Second thing he says, the story is selectively edited in a partisan way. It's usually used in the service of a progressive cause. He said, I've noticed the same people never say, when Jesus was a refugee, his family was fleeing a politician who legalized the slaughter of infants. Exactly. Therefore, you must not vote for politicians who support abortion. It's used the story for me, but not for thee. And then the last thing he said, which I thought was really good, he says, it uses one part of the Bible to ignore the others. The Bible distinguishes between the role of individual and the role of state, which I know you've spoken on quite a bit. For instance, Jesus forbids individuals living by the sword, Matthew 26, but the Bible commands governments to bear the sword, Romans 13. So while there can be no question about how individual Christians relate to immigrants with love, there's legitimate questions about how governments should be handling a policy that is destroying, I'm adding this part, destroying a nation from within.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think two things. First of all, you're completely right, and your source is completely right on all of those things. We're not talking about refugees either, by the way. We're talking about illegal migrants, illegal travelers, illegal people. It's not a refugee. It's not somebody that's like, oh yeah, my the president's trying to murder me, so I have to escape somewhere. It's like, oh, California's giving free money and free food. I'm there. It can break your heart because right next to my apartment, across the street, there's a migrant hotel, an illegal immigrant hotel, and these little tiny babies, the little kids are going to school and they have backpacks on from the city and clothes from the city, and they're more excited than they've ever been in their life, and their face is beaming. And part of me says, like, this is America. This is how kind we are. Yeah. This is how, and it's like, it breaks your heart. So like, to have a human perspective is good, but also to say like, but we have to stop this or else it's going to break all of our infrastructure and prices will increase. And, all of that chaos will ensue unless we have order. We can't just keep printing money. We can't just keep pushing the debt on our children. We have to stop this at some point. The other thing about Jesus as a refugee is like, he was a refugee legally, like he was allowed to go to Egypt. Their parents were allowed to hang out in Egypt for a while, and then they went back home. They didn't stay there for the rest of their life. So, it's just not correct in any application.
Yeah, but he gets us, David. He gets us. He gets us.
He gets all of everything we do. He gets us.
sorry, I couldn't resist a little
No,
bit
it's
there.
good. That was perfect. That's perfect.
On the largest marketing campaign in the history of Christianity, and it's progressive doublespeak, just
Cool.
embarrassing.
Yes.
But so, within all that, I wanted to hit some of these topics and just talk about it because I think this year is going to require courage of us that, as Christians, as the body of Christ, as people that think biblically and think critically, and we want to align ourselves with the Word of God, that we are not duped by these progressive talking points that feel good but make no sense. That we go to a deeper level of thinking. We understand that globalism was not God's idea, and that relation to obviously Jesus. We serve a Savior who's Jewish, who's coming back to rule in Jerusalem. He's not against the Jewish people, and I know that there's more to the discussion, but to pretend that chanting for genocide and anti-Semitism is somehow aligned biblically is rather embarrassing. And then in the last part of the immigration, any other topics before we end this podcast that you see coming in 2024 that you want to hit on to give a biblical perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing, Sam, is we really do have to figure out how to get the church to vote. I mean, we need to get pastors to be like, crack the whip on getting people to the polls. We need to get our churches that care about this stuff. I do think we'll stand before the Lord and he'll say, oh yeah, you had an opportunity to kind of be in charge in your nation and you handed it over to the people that want to kill babies and chop children's body parts off. So like, what were you doing? And so I think we need to do that. And as pastors, I think we really need to push people in the right direction, and then obviously inform as well. The other thing I think is important is I think at the beginning of the year when you're talking about what to do, I think Christians should fast and pray and seek the Lord. The year gets busy and it's going to be a wild one. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if chaos will ensue. We don't know if there will be a Black Swan event. We don't know if it'll just roll into 2024 and our guy will lose and the bad guys will continue to destroy the foundations of our nation. But what we can do is fast and pray and prepare ourselves for whatever the Lord has coming down the pipe this year. And I think that is probably the most important thing as believers that we can do, as well as connecting with you and Charlie and me and other voices that can tell you what's going on, like that we don't forget the spiritual battle here, the spiritual dynamic that's at play. Yeah.
You're so right. And are you guys doing a fast at the beginning of this year as a church?
I am. Begrudgingly, I am doing a fast. I'm not asking anybody to join me this year, but fasting. I came to the Lord, really submitted my life to the Lord in 2020. And that was when young people were en masse doing this fasting movement with Lou Engle and the Call and repenting on the National Mall. And that's really, I cut my teeth in Christianity in the early years of fasting. So it's always been a very essential part of my life. I have tons of stories about it. I mean, I think I told you my biggest case that I ever won, this $50 million oil and gas controversy case. I had no business and I was fasting and praying. And I felt like on the seventh day of the fast, the Lord said, I've given you what you've asked for. And the next day I get a call from this client and it's the biggest one I've ever had. And it's like fasting and prayer is a part of the process, like knowing the stuff. Like we need truth and spirit. We need to know the stuff. We need to study the stuff. We need to hear the right voices. And we also need to like grind in the spirit as well. Like fast, don't eat any food for a couple of days. Like seek the Lord. He will draw near to you if you draw near to him, especially in a culture like ours that's so addicted to sugar and hedonism and blah, blah, blah. I hate fasting. I hate it. But it's very, very good for my soul, my spirit, both.
Yeah, that's so good. I know we are starting our church-wide fast. It's a 10-day fast that we're doing. We're kicking off this Sunday. We're asking people to do a meal, multiple meals a day. And so if you're listening to this, and even if you're not a part of our church, you want to join with us in that. And we're praying. Our theme for this year as a church is steadfast, that we would be immovable, unshaken, that we would not shrink back, regardless of what happens in the moment in the culture. And I want to encourage those of you that are listening to also do the same. And plan this August. We're doing the the Courage Conference. Again, this August coming up, and hopefully, if we can make the dates work, David is going to come back and join us as well. Well, David, thanks so much for being on the podcast. Very interesting stuff. I appreciate your perspective. And it's good stuff. Thank you.
Good to be here. Thanks, man.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. I hope this message has inspired you to courageously stand up, speak up, and to live out your faith. If you like what you heard today, give me a 5-star review, follow the Courage Over Cowardice podcast, and share it with others to learn how to stand for truth in the midst of culture.